Good morning. Welcome to North Chapel. I am Clara Jimenez, and I am happy to serve as service coordinator this morning. If you are new to North Chapel, welcome. And if you are visiting, please consider signing our guest book at the back of the sanctuary. We are still, with COVID precautions, this is, it's painful to repeat it, but we are still under COVID precautions, so we ask you that you remain masked and that we hum instead of singing our hymns. Unfortunately, that also means that we cannot have coffee hour, but fortunately the weather is beautiful and we can gather outside and catch up with good friends and make new acquaintances. There are a number of things going on in North Chapel every week, and I encourage you to look at the announcement page in the order of service. Particularly of notice is that on June 26, North Chapel is holding a fundraiser for Ukraine with dancers, poets, and other artists. And I think I have another announcement from Akanka.
Bookstock again. Announcement. Bookstock hasn't happened yet, but I thank all the people who have signed up to help, but we still need more helpers to sort books. And the sorting is done at the Masonic Temple, and you don't have to carry big boxes. And the advantage is that you can find books that you might want to buy yourself. But we need help also for selling for the weekend, the last weekend of this month. Selling on the green. So I'll be here taking fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Akanka. And finally, this is a good time to turn your cell phones or other devices in silent or turn them off entirely. The theme of this month is the sixth principle, which is a goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. World community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. When I see this goal, it's such a lofty goal, and it seems so unattainable that it makes me almost feel discouraged. What can I do for world community in peace, liberty, and justice? If I look at it as an item in an agenda to tick off, I really will feel discouraged. It seems an impossible goal, but perhaps it's more productive to see it as an invitation to imagine, as an invitation to imagine a world that is possible and that will lead us to action. In the words of John Lennon, imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I am a dreamer, but I am not the only one. Envisioning and imagining leads to action. This also reminds me of the words of Sean Parker Dennison, Reverend Sean Parker Dennison, who says, if we want us to believe and to live as we believe that a world community with peace, liberty, and justice is possible, there is no guarantee that we will succeed, but I can assure you that we will improve ourselves and improve the world by trying. But here in the conversation to attain this world is the intersection with the topic of today's reflection. When we work in community towards peace and justice, there will be disagreements and very difficult conversations. There will be tension between the community needs and individual aspirations. There will be arguments even about what justice, peace, or community mean, and this will bring conflict. So what do we do when things get, as Reverend Leon Dunkley says, spicy hot? I offer the words of Thich Nhat Hanh from his book, Anger, Wisdom to Cool Conflict. When we get angry, we suffer. If you really understand that, you will also be able to understand that when the other person is angry, it means that she is suffering. When someone insults you or behaves violently towards you, you have to be intelligent enough to see that the person suffers from his own violence and anger. But we tend to forget. We think that we are the only one that suffers and the other person is our oppressor. This is enough to make anger arise and to strengthen our desire to punish. We want to punish the other person because we suffer. And then we have anger in us. We have violence in us just as they do. When we see that our suffering and anger are not different from their suffering and anger, we will behave more compassionately. So understanding the other is understanding yourself, and understanding yourself is understanding the other person. Everything must begin with you.
Before Queen Gertrude drank the fatal drink, I wish I could have shared these words with her. Teach me the golden rule. Make me a lovesick fool in the light of day. Let sorrow drift away. The crown of thorn has many jewels. Songs of glory sung in hate only destroy what love has made. If the kingdom comes, you don't want to be the one who is standing in the way. All the stories that I have heard enlighten ones who walk the earth. They bring me sweet relief and rid me of human grief, and I am free from every hurt. Sheryl Crow once sang these songs, and they've stayed with me over the years. So the best part of the tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, by William Shakespeare is not the to be or not to be speech, the famous soliloquy that the young and living Hamlet muses and mutters to himself. And the best part of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, is not the explanation of the orchard fratricide, the famous passage for which the old and ghostly King Hamlet comes back from death to life to explain to his noble son. No, the best part of Hamlet is terrible. It is the part when Prince Hamlet and vengeful Laertes are fencing, and Claudius is egging them on. Claudius, the murderous uncle turned father to young Hamlet, the new king who has secretly killed his brother and married his brother's wife and ascended to his brother's throne, the caustic scoundrel, the relentless wretch who wantonly tore up treaties protecting peace in that region. Murderous, knew King Claudius, fratricidal brother to betrayal. Claudius was scheming. He needed Laertes to win in the fencing battle. Through his victory, Claudius could rid himself of Hamlet, his great threat. So Claudius poisoned the tip, envenomed the tip of Laertes' sword without his knowledge. And Claudius poisoned the wine that Hamlet was to drink. And by one path or another, Claudius would have his way. Young Hamlet was going to die until Queen Gertrude finally came to her senses. She had been blinded by her sorrow. She had been overwhelmed by grief, crushed by the loss of her dear husband, the king, young Prince Hamlet's father. My God, how that royal couple loved each other so. Their son had put it this way: his father was so loving to my mother, Hamlet said, that he might argue with the winds of heaven to visit her face not too roughly. How she would hang on him as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on. Their love was like a wildfire that burned nothing in its path, burned up not even time, but left them breathless in the stopping of it. Suspended were all the worries of the day for their good fortune and for their love. Claudius put an end to all of that. So it was that good Queen Gertrude was overcome with such great grief. She married again far too quickly. She married Claudius, and Claudius saw to that. Within a month of her dear one's death, leading reeling son Hamlet to cry out, "Frailty, thy name is woman." Hamlet found his mother's actions deplorable, unforgivable. He and his mother, the queen, they could not see eye to eye, so he dismissed her, and she endured him. She endured his brooding. She endured his petulance. She endured his depressive indulgences until finally she realized that he might be right. So she thought that Claudius might be mad or evil or some combination of the two. She thought that Laertes' sword might be envenomed and that Hamlet's wine might be poisoned, the wine that she was holding in her hands at that time. And so she tested out her theory. She looked at Claudius right in the eye, and she placed the wine to her lips to force his reaction. With a gesture of the toast, she offered these words: "The queen carouses to thy good fortune, Hamlet." And Claudius, stricken, tries to stop her, but is unable to do so. He says, "Gertrude, do not drink." And with this, she realizes how deeply she has been betrayed, and she drinks. Like I said, the best part of Hamlet is terrible. Ugh. That moment. What an incredible experience the artist, William Shakespeare, was able to create. The terror of the envenomed swordplay against the backdrop of the poisoned wine. I know that every family has its issues, but oh my God. This family was terrible. The drama of all that destroys me every time. What a moment that this artist was able to describe, and yet Shakespeare could not have succeeded in doing so had he failed to capture the humanness of all of this. Despite the unmitigated catastrophe of the storyline, we see ourselves reflected in lesser ways. And this is the very purpose of tragedy. By the end of the play, we realize this. There is such consequential treachery and treason, so much violence and loss. As Hamlet himself approaches his end, he employs his dear friend Horatio. He says, if thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity for a while, take a break from the parties. And in this harsh world, draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. For without Prince Hamlet's perspective on the unfolding story, a civil war would soon rage without meaning. Here, the final curtain falls and the war is underway. What eases this depth of suffering? What provokes some modicum of relief from this distress? Good morning and good Sunday. I hope that this new day finds you well. Today is Sunday, June the 12th, and the title of this morning's reflection is rather spicy. It's called Ghost Pepper, the Ghost Pepper Papers. Gotta say that a bunch of times. How might this flock, this hardy stock of Vermonters handle this, I wonder? The reflection is inspired by two seemingly unrelated events: a media press release regarding General Assembly, the upcoming National Conference of Unitarian Universalists in Portland, Oregon, and my recent choice to grow ghost peppers in my garden this year. Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking. I was planning out my garden. I was purchasing my the starter plants, and I bought a set of ghost pepper plants on a whim, not really knowing what they were. I was drawn to the purchase because of the name. I like the idea of ghost peppers. Ghost peppers sounded more exciting than cucumbers to me. Probably it would be wise to grow them both. I did a little research, a Google search, about these particularly potent peppers, and I found out that they are also known as boot jolokia. It is a pepper cultivated in northeastern India. It's a hybrid pepper. In 2007, the Guinness World Record certified that the ghost pepper was the world's hottest chili pepper, 170 times hotter than Tabasco sauce. Now, I should say that I only recently became able to handle Tabasco sauce. I find it delicious now, but it used to burn my tongue and turn my stomach and make me gasp for air. Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking. I will let you know how things turn out by the end of the summer. Ghost peppers really are really very spicy, but they do not deeply concern me. I am much more deeply concerned about the media press release that I was talking about, the one about General Assembly. It read, in part, as follows. For immediate release, June 2022, General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association in Portland, Oregon, is to be met with protesters from within its own ranks. For the first time in its 61-year history, the national meeting of America's most liberal religious body, the UUA, will face demonstrations from some of its own members and clergy. They are alarmed, and by this, the writer of the press release means we are alarmed. At the radical authoritarian and anti-liberal turn of the association's leadership in recent years, Jay Kiskell and Todd Eckloff, along with many other concerned Unitarian Universalists, will be outside of the Oregon Convention Center at 777 Northeast Martin Luther King Boulevard. Unitarian Universalism was born out of the Radical Reformation. There is a book so titled that is written by George Hunston Williams, and he was a dear friend to James Luther Adams, a groundbreaking Unitarian theologian of the 20th century. They were both pretty radical in their pursuit of liberal ideas. They stood radically against the violence of their time, radically against prejudice, radically against anti-Semitism, radically against Hitler and his rise to power in the 1930s. They were both there at the time. Who we are now grows out of who we were then. The idea that Unitarian Universalists are alarmed by that which is radical is, let's just say, historically inaccurate. On the other hand, it's a media-friendly phrase. It attracts attention. As they used to say in the newspaper business, if it bleeds, it leads. Presumably, this is the goal of the author's language. Now, if you read further into the press release, the personal core of the protest, the personal core of the press release begins to clarify itself. The press release reads, Reverend Dr. Todd Eckloff was censured and stripped of his professional credentials after writing a book critical of the UUA in 2019. It was called The Gadfly Papers. The Ghost Pepper Papers is a play on his title. Eklof said, "I became a Unitarian because commitment to freedom of conscience is kind of my thing. I thought it was kind of our thing too, and I'm certain it was until recently," end quote. The contact of the press release, which I also assume to be its author, is deeply committed to the freedom of conscience. He says it is kind of my thing, quote unquote. I'm sorry, but this reads to me a little bit more like an online dating profile than it does a statement of theology. Todd Eklof is a very smart man. His grasp of history is impressive. In fact, many of those who criticize him are not always as knowledgeable as he is. Unfortunately, and here I speak only for myself, my former colleague's spiritual maturity is not as impressive as his intellect. He has positioned himself as the gadfly of liberal faith. You know what a gadfly is? A gadfly is that speaker of the truth, even against the odds and against the grain, that needs to be listened to, even though that truth is threatening and annoying. It comes out of Plato and his conversation about the death of Socrates. Socrates was a gadfly, pointing out the inelegances of his time. Todd Eklof is positioning himself as sort of a postmodern Socrates, calling out what he perceives as this faith's rejection of reason and tolerance, its categorical resistance to systemic racism, its silencing of dissent, and its subversion of democracy. Now, he feels this way because Unitarian Universalism leadership has taken a hard turn, a very realistic turn, towards the work of anti-racism. It's taking that work very seriously, and it is inspiring spirited reactions. Todd Eklof is not a racist. He agrees with most of the platforms, but he's taken a position outside of that because he likes the attention, because he really feels and really believes what he's saying, and because the Gadfly Papers caused quite a stir. The Gadfly Papers were offensive. They all but called out members of the Unitarian Universalist leadership community, and it caused a lot of harm. We have a challenge before us because the causing of harm is not against our faith. Sometimes to speak the truth does cause harm. But what Todd did was single out individual people and all but name them and shame them publicly, which was problematic. Todd Eklof wrote a self-published book called The Gadfly Papers in May of 2019. And in June of 2019, without the consent of his congregation, as I understand it, he distributed copies of this publication at the General Assembly that was taking place in Spokane. Todd was then and is now serving as the minister to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, Washington, a church that has now split as a result of this controversy. Those who could follow Todd's leadership have stayed with him. Those who could not follow his leadership have resigned their membership. Now, you might not appreciate this, but when this conflict began, I reached out to Todd. I offered a tiny gesture of support for him, even though I radically disagreed with what he was saying. I reached out to him because he does have the right to say it. My reaching out was intended as a collegial olive branch. I figured if he pursued it, I would be willing to work with him and speak with him. I would be willing to try to find a more elegant solution than the one that is about to take place in Portland, Oregon this month. As ministers in fellowship with one another, Todd and I were bound by a sacred covenant, the cherished honoring of the religious authority of the congregations that we are called to serve. That's your religious authority. In the language of installation, the language that we used here at North Chapel when I was installed, no right is more precious to a free congregation than the right of choosing its own minister. Neither is any right more precious to a minister than that of choosing the congregation that he or she will serve. The congregational freedom that is described here is powerful. It is the flower of a great deal of nurturing and growth as a community. We are radically free. No one on earth can tell us what to believe. I don't have the power and don't want the power to tell you what to think, how to pray, who to love, where to live, when to die or be reborn. No one has that power in our faith. Part of the call to ministry is to prepare the ground upon which we might make our own best individual decisions, each to our gift. Yesterday morning, at David Doolittle's memorial service, David's brother, his older, shorter brother, as he said, Bob, described the many divergent aspects of the faith that occurred within the brothers of that family and the extended family. Together they were gay and they were straight, Buddhist, Hindu, Catholic, mystical, eclectic Unitarian Universalists. There's a song by Hosier that says, "When my time comes around, lay me gently in the cold dark earth. No grave can hold my body down. Crawl home to her. In faith, we are stronger than death." In healthy community, we bring meaning to life. No naive rules can hold the spirit. We cleave to that freedom, and at the same time, we are bound and we are limited. As the saying goes, we hold it defensively. Your freedom to flail about your arms stops at my nose. My freedom to flail about my arms stops at your nose. We must respect one another. We all must matter. We must keep living and learning together. Surely we cherish freedom in our movement. As Baldwin reminds us, freedom requires the most rigid discipline. Kant called this the categorical imperative. Jesus called it the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. For we exist in one another. We can be foolish and dangerous to imagine otherwise. As a person, Todd Eckloff is free to believe whatever he wants to believe, within a set of obvious limitations. He is free to believe that the ghost peppers that I am now growing in my garden is his. I could hardly stop him from believing that, and I don't take issue with that. But if he comes to my house and he picks them, he and I will have a problem. I already have groundhog issues. I don't need another thief in the garden. As a minister, Todd is free to believe whatever he wants to believe, but his actions must be governed by the needs of his congregation. If he were to steal the ghost peppers in the name of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, if he were to lead his followers to do so, there would be problems. One of the problems with his book, The Gadfly Papers, is that it sometimes feels like he's stealing from the garden. In his book, Eckloff reflects on the merging of Unitarian Universalism, an event that took place in 1961. He says, "I propose, since the Unitarians and the Universalists have been unable to accomplish our primary purpose for joining together, establishing a universal religion of humanity for liberal religions around the world, that it might be time to break up." I feel a little jilted. There are a couple of issues with his statement. Firstly, I know a lot of ministers at this point. Sean Parker Dennison is a friend of mine, the person you quoted today. I have to pause and tell a funny story about Sean Parker Dennison. Sean Parker Dennison took a course that I was teaching at the Star King School from the ministry in California. Sean is an F to M trans man. Does that make sense to you? a female to man, gendered man. We were talking about the issue of race, and I asked him, I said, he's a minister, he's several years older than me, more experienced. And I said, do you want to tell people who you are, or do you just want to attend the class? And he said, I don't want to call attention to myself. Just let me audit your class and I'll just listen and be quiet. And so he did, for the most part, until we got into this conversation about how contentious the issue of race actually is. This was, I don't know, 20 years ago, so it wasn't nearly as obvious as it is now, although it was pretty obvious. One of my students, who was a Cal Berkeley student at the time, was taking the class, and he said, I don't think race is so bad. And I said, it really is. And he said, I don't think it is. I said, it really is. And he said, I don't think so. And Sean Parker interrupted us. Sean Parker Dennison is about 6 inches shorter than me, about 50 pounds heavier than me. He's white and bearded. And he said to the student, he said, I had to give birth to a black son before I understood how serious race is. I had to give birth to a black son before I understood how serious race is. Now, he said this rather matter-of-factly because he knows that he's a female-to-male transgendered man, but no one in the class did. So everyone was like, what? We have some work to do. But I do know a lot of ministers at this point. But I don't know any of them. I don't know many or anyone really who is devoted to establishing a universal religion for humanity. As Todd Eckloff said, was our purpose in uniting. I don't know what he means. I'd like to ask him. I'm sure that he means something. What he seems to be suggesting, though, is antithetical to my practice of faith. It's so curious. Secondly, the merger or the consolidation of Unitarian Universalists took a long time. The National Conference of Unitarian Churches, established in 1865, that was the year that the Civil War ended. North Chapel was 31 years old. This house. The National Conference was looking to merge with the Universalists way back then. And in the 1890s, there was a group. In 1931, there was another group. In 1953, the two denominations established a council of liberal churches to work towards a unification. By 1955, there was a joint interim committee and a step-by-step process leading to that end. And finally, in 1961, it took place. The merger or the consolidation took place slowly over the course of 96 years. Todd Eckloff's perception of our failure, as far as I can tell, date back only 3 years to 2019. Before the Gadfly Papers controversy, I had never heard Todd Eckloff's name. He claims, and this I quote, that universalism has died and has been replaced by a grotesque imposter in its place. He says that Unitarianism, though muted, still lives, but must break free of its bonds that now constrain it if it's going to survive. The beautiful thing about freedom in our faith is that we get to believe or perceive whatever it is that we truly and honestly believe and perceive. We get that. That's ours. We understand that the sovereignty or the place in which our spirit resides is within us. It's a radical notion that the kingdom of heaven is within you and everywhere around you, but everywhere you go, you carry a little piece of heaven. We agree that there is no person who can say, Joanne, this is what I will have you believe. We accept that, right? There's no person that can say, Catherine, sorry, I'm not sure what you believed before, but now I must tell you. We don't agree with that authority. But at the same point, we have to be careful to honor the tradition that brings us that freedom. In the name of that freedom, we cannot disparage our faith as thoroughly as Todd has. We certainly can't racialize that discouragement, and we certainly can't ask the media to bear witness. Todd's strength is not in the power of his ideas. It lay in his ability and his willingness to make things hot and spicy. I went through a spectacularly difficult ministry before I came up to Vermont. In keeping with the best practices of our faith, I wrote a letter. I did not call the newspapers. I did not issue a press release. I did not organize a protest at General Assembly. I did not make things ultra hot and spicy, although I could have quite easily. Instead, I entered into a process that we've established in our faith for dealing with our differences. It was not easy, but it strengthens us over time and brings real peace to our lives and to our movement. If you find yourself embroiled in a controversy or awash in grief and sorrow, like Queen Gertrude was of old, beware of the gestures of too eager men that are too eager for quick fix solutions. Cleave to the wildfire love that animates life and burns nothing, scorches nothing along the way. All the stories I have heard, enlightened ones who've walked the earth, they bring me sweet relief and rid me of human grief, and I am free from every hurt. Sure as the wind flows, sure as the river flows, we will meet again on the long road home. Sometimes ghost peppers come along to spice life up a bit, and other times they come along and burn us. Murderous King Claudius stood in the way of the coming kingdom. I don't think my former colleague is particularly fratricidal like King Claudius was, but if he were here right now, I would say without pretense or irony, brother, you're killing me. Like him, I believe that being free from every hurt does not mean weeding the garden free from ghost peppers. It means knowing how to use them properly. So if you should find yourself in the ghost pepper pages of life, don't freak out. Don't get all hot and spicy unless you know how to enjoy it. Share what you love, stay in the community, and invite us all into our best selves. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.